Peter Pan. Chapter 1. Peter Comes. All children, except one, grow up. Wendy was 2 years old when she found out she must grow up. When she was playing in a garden one day, she picked a flower and ran with it to her mother. Mrs. Darling said, "Oh, why can't you stay like this forever?" Since then, Wendy knew that she must grow up. Wendy had a mother, father, and 2 younger brothers. Her brothers' names were John and Michael. The family also had a big brown dog named Nana. Nana took very good care of the children. She gave them their baths. She walked them to school. She never forgot John's uniform on the days he played football. She carried an umbrella in her mouth when it looked like rain. The Darling family did not have much money, but they were happy. They would have wild dances together. They were such fun times. Mrs. Darling was the best dancer. She would spin so fast that all you could see was her smile. There never was a happier family until Peter Pan came. One morning, Mrs. Darling found leaves in the children's room that were not there before. "Peter left those here," Wendy said. "What do you mean, Wendy?" Mrs. Darling asked. "Peter doesn't clean his feet," Wendy said. "I think he comes in by the window." Mrs. Darling just thought Wendy was talking about a dream. But it wasn't a dream, and soon everything changed forever. The next night, the children were all in bed. Mrs. Darling sang to them until they all fell asleep. The room was so quiet and the fire was so warm that soon Mrs. Darling also fell asleep. Suddenly, a window in the room opened. A boy entered. A strange light, as big as your hand, followed him. Mrs. Darling woke up with a cry and saw the boy. Somehow, she knew that he was Peter Pan. He was a beautiful boy. He still had all his first teeth. He wore clothes made of leaves. When he saw that Mrs. Darling was a grown-up, he made a mean face at her. "Oh!" Mrs. Darling cried. Nana ran into the room and jumped at the boy. But the boy jumped out the window. Mrs. Darling cried out again because she thought he was killed. She ran outside to look for his body, but it was not there. When she returned to the room, she found Nana with something in her mouth. It was the boy's shadow. As the boy jumped out, Nana closed the window quickly and caught his shadow. Mrs. Darling put the shadow away in a box and waited for the right time to tell her husband about it. The next Friday, Mr. and Mrs. Darling got ready to go to a party. Mrs. Darling wore her white dress. Mr. Darling put on his tie. But Mrs. Darling had a bad feeling that night. "Oh, I wish I did not have to go to a party tonight," she said. But they both had to go. So they put the children to bed and said good night. Mr. Darling put Nana outside in the yard for the night. Then they quietly left the house.